So the question for us today is, why is this happening? Why are all these civil conflicts caused by immigration throughout the Western world? So this is happening in Britain, but as you know, immigration in the United States led to the victory of Donald Trump in last year's elections in the United States. A lot of conflict comes from the fact that immigration is happening too fast in the Western world. So after COVID, you see this large spike in immigrants. The other issue is that most of these immigrants are coming from countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in East Asia. So it's clear that these people are different from you. Okay, so before there might have been a lot of EU, European immigrants, but now it's just mainly countries outside of Europe. So the British people feel as though they're being invaded by foreigners. The demographic changes to British society are stark. So I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, okay? But like the dark brown are places where in the past 5-10 years, the immigrant population has tripled 3 times, okay? And as you can see, there are quite a few pockets where immigration is sort of overwhelming the local population. So if you go to Britain, there are some places where you feel this is like Morocco, or this is like Rwanda, or maybe even Egypt. Okay? So the British people feel they're under siege. And this is happening throughout the Western world. So this is Australia, okay? So Australia after COVID, huge spike in immigration. And most of them are coming from non-European countries. So the greatest spike is in India, but then you also have China and the Philippines as well. These are the 3 major sources of immigrants to Australia. Okay? The same is happening in France, where you're seeing a huge spike in immigration. And again, most of the immigrants are coming from African or Middle Eastern countries. And so the French feel as though their culture is being diluted, it's being attacked and invaded. This happened all throughout Western Europe. The UK, France, Italy, and Germany are seeing a huge spike in immigrants and refugees. And so their culture feels threatened. What's also happening is a huge spike in inflation. Okay, so this is something called the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is just measuring the price of basic goods like food and shelter. Okay, and as you can see, there's a huge spike in prices. So as these immigrants are coming into your country, you also feel as though your quality of life is getting worse and worse. It's getting harder for you to afford basic goods like rent and food. It's getting harder for you to support your family. The major increase is in housing prices. Okay, so Canada, these past 5 years, has seen a huge influx of immigrants, and this has caused housing prices to skyrocket. The United States, which has a much larger economy than Canada, the housing prices are pretty stable. You can still afford to buy a house if you're a young person in the United States, not in Canada. Okay, you see this huge spike in Canada. The housing prices are now unaffordable. This is a chart that shows you economic growth as compared to housing prices. So as you can see in the United States, housing prices, there's a correlation between income and housing prices. Okay? This is pretty reasonable. In Canada, it is not reasonable. Okay? So GDP, housing prices is growing like this, but housing prices is just skyrocketing. And that's why Canadians feel as though the Canadian dream of one day having their own house, it's basically dead. So one strange thing is that as Canada lets in more immigrants, and as property prices go up, you would think that they would build more and more houses. But as you can see, housing supply, okay, housing supply, it's pretty flat, even though immigration is going up. Does anyone know why this would be the case? Why is it that you have a policy of letting in more immigrants, but you don't have a policy of building more housing for them? That's kind of strange, right? Can anyone guess why that would be the case? Yeah? Sorry, can you speak in the microphone? Thank you.
Okay, maybe they want to make sure that the housing's not affordable, maybe because they want to make more money. Because now there's like more competition for housing. Definitely, as you said, the prices of housing was like going like skyrocketing, and people would make more money. Like people who provide the housings would naturally, real estate people make more money, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, okay? So policy is not being controlled by what's best for the nation and the people. It's controlled by vested interests that will make money off the process, right? So as you say, real estate developers can make money off this process, but the people who benefit the most are actually property owners, right? So if you already have a house, if the supply is constant but the demand goes up, then you know from economics class that the value of a house increases artificially. So it's making homeowners very happy. Okay? And that's why you have this crisis in Canada. The other issue that's really problematic in the Western world is that as the number of immigrants goes up, native people, the native population, they're not having children. Okay? So this is Canada, where the birth rate, okay, the blue is the birth rate, okay? It's steadily going down, whereas immigrants are going up. So it's the immigrants who provide most of the new people in Canada. In fact, right now, 25%, a quarter of all Canadians are first-generation immigrants. First-generation Canadians, meaning that they're immigrants to the country. And if you just look at this trend, in 40 years' time, 50 years' time, there'll be very few white Canadians in Canada. And this is causing a lot of conflict and tension in the country. So you have these huge issues. Housing is unaffordable. Inflation is going up. Ethnic tensions are increasing. But the Canadian government still insists on increasing the number of immigrants in the country. Okay? There's no policy rollback where like, you know what, let's have a moratorium. Clearly, our policy is too rapid and we need to slow things down. In fact, as you can see, they're actually going to ramp up the process. The goal for Canada, right now the Canadian population is about 35 to 40 million people. They want 100 million people in Canada by the year 2100. And guess what? The majority of these people are going to come from India and probably China. Okay? And as we discussed, the percentage of immigrants as part of the total population, it's just rapidly increasing. So in Australia, it's almost a third now. In Canada, it's a quarter. In Germany, it's a fifth. And these percentages will go up and up and up, leading to more and greater ethnic tension and immigrant protests within these countries. As you can see, the number of immigrants coming from India far surpasses that of other countries, okay? And these are just legal immigrants. We're not counting in students. So there are millions and millions of Indian students right now in Canada on student visas. And they're looking for a path to permanent residency, to citizenship. And that's what leads to situations like this, okay? You have these viral videos online where you have thousands and thousands of Indian students lining up for hours and hours because they're applying for a minimum wage job at a restaurant or at a store. Life for these Indian students is just terrible. A lot of them live 8 to a room. Okay? There's one room that was meant for one person. There are now 8 students living in that room. At the same time, what's really interesting is that the Indians are now an extremely powerful political force in Canada. This was the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, meeting with representatives of the Indian community because he depends on them for his votes. In last year's federal election, 22 Indian people of Indian descent were elected to parliament, okay? So in parliament, there's 243 seats. 22 of them now are Indian. How many Chinese? How many MPs of Chinese origin? There are less than 10. So even though the Chinese have been there longer, and even though they're actually more numerous Chinese than Indians, the Indians are extremely powerful political force. Now, a lot of it is because Indians come from democracy, so they're very good at debate. They're very good at organizing. They're very good at collective action. And that's what leads them to excel in the Canadian political system. At the same time, we can imagine that if current trends continue, if the immigrant population from India increases, and if the Indians continue to amass more political power, there could be a situation where the Indians take over the Canadian government in like 20 or 40 years' time. So there's a real risk that in Canada, that their native population gets replaced by the Indians. And this is happening elsewhere as well. Yes, a question.
Like all the Indian immigrants that you have mentioned, like it took a part of the Canadian population. How about the having the risk of Indians took over Canadian, but how about the people that is local in Canadian? Like how are they doing right now? Because we are all focusing on immigrants.
Right, okay. That's a great question, okay? So immigrants are suffering, but actually the local population is suffering even more because as we discussed in the last class, the economy is declining and it's pretty rapid decline. So it's harder for young people to find jobs, especially with immigrants coming into the country, right? Prices are very expensive nowadays. So it's very hard for young people to live and work in big cities. So as these immigrants are coming into the country, they're putting tremendous pressure on the local population. And that's why there's so much ethnic tension throughout the Western world right now. Okay? So this leads us to a paradox. If immigrants are making life worse for everyone, especially young people, who's the future of these nations, why is this happening? Okay? So I want you guys to keep this in the back of your mind. You probably know the answer already because you know how property prices work, right? Okay, so let's move on to another topic. So Canada, like 10 years ago, introduced a new policy called MAID, called Medical Assistance in Dying, euthanasia. And the idea here is that if you feel life is meaningless, if you're depressed, if you feel that you cannot cure your disease, the government will help you kill yourself. The government will let you die. Now, the big question then is, yeah, but 25 years ago, this was illegal in the world, right? Suicide was illegal. If you helped someone kill himself, you'd be put in prison. This would be basically murder. So what's the difference between suicide and the government helping you kill yourself? Well, there really isn't, okay? But the government says there is a difference, okay? So this is a brochure from the government, from the Canadian government, explaining to you why suicide is bad, okay? Suicide is bad, but suicide by government is good, okay? And it's really stupid. It's disgusting. It's disgustingly stupid, okay? What they say is that if you do suicide, well, you do it alone and you shock your friends and family. But if you do MAID, then everyone knows you're killing yourself, and so they won't be so sad when you die. Right? If you kill yourself, you might screw it up. But if the government does it for you, you won't screw it up because it's being facilitated by professionals who know what they're doing. All right? If you think this is stupid, there's more stupidity to come. All right? And what this tells us is, we discussed this last class, is one major sign of decline in society is the over-bureaucratization of society, where the government interferes in everything, okay? This is the absolute number of deaths from euthanasia in Canada. As you can see, in 2016 it started, you had about 1,000. By 2021, it's at 10,000, okay? So the numbers are going up really rapidly. Why? Well, because if you want to kill yourself, they won't stop you. This is the number of days required to be approved for suicide. As you can see in the Netherlands, sorry, this is Oregon actually. This is Oregon, United States. Okay, the number of days have been going down, but it's still like at most a month, okay? In Canada, they'll do it in like 10 days for you. They won't even think about it. They're like, you want to kill yourself? Do it, man. Good for you. Good choice. Doctors have been trained to not do any harm, right? Well, and death ought to be the last resort. But in Canada, death is now the first resort. If you go to a doctor and say, I want to die, the doctor's like, sure, let's do it, man. That's pretty disgusting. All right. Why are people killing so like if you see the number of approval rates have been going way up. It seems as though they have a quota to fill. This is 2019. Only 75% were approved. Now it's 81%. It's almost like they have a quota. They're trying to kill as many people as possible, right? As you can see, this number is the percentage of people who die because of euthanasia. This is the Netherlands, which for the longest time had a very open policy when it comes to euthanasia. And yeah, it's going up, but this huge spike is Canada. Okay? It seems as though Canada's in a rush to kill as many people as possible. So who's dying? Yeah, do you have a question?
So the suicide of Canada is not euthanasia? Is that also a type of euthanasia?
No, okay. All right, so suicide is when you kill yourself. Euthanasia is when a doctor helps you kill yourself. Euthanasia means good death. It means like you will die painlessly. Okay?
Yeah, but like the suicide, you said that suicide by Canada government, is that a type of...
No, okay. Euthanasia is suicide by government. Okay? All right. So why are people dying? Well, a lot of them, as you can see, most is actually from cancer. Now, what's interesting about cancer is that it's the most expensive disease to treat, right? Well, that's interesting. And a lot of cancer, it's pretty painful, but it's not terminal. You can still live with cancer, right? So it seems as though people with cancer are being encouraged to die because they're a burden on the system, which means who's dying? Who's dying here? It's poor people who are dying, right? This is pretty obvious. And this is even more interesting. Okay, this is the most disgusting part. If the government were to prove your death, you would think that there'd be a rigorous process, right? It would be the last option. But let's understand why people are killing themselves. And there are two main reasons. The first major reason is loss of ability to engage in meaningful activities. It's because you're not happy. This is a lame reason to kill yourself. Okay? Also, loss of ability to perform activities of daily living. It's harder for you to go buy groceries. It's harder for you to walk around. Okay? So again, what's happening is that poor people are dying. And poor people are encouraged to kill themselves because the poor are being a burden on the medical system. And that's the entire basis of euthanasia. So let me ask you this question. Why is it that 25 years ago, we discouraged euthanasia? In fact, it made legal to conduct euthanasia, even if the person was suffering from brain cancer, and the person was just basically in hell every day, the government would not allow euthanasia. Why not? Yeah?
Maybe because it was like harder to regulate, like the procedures to take for euthanasia, and because it was like such a new thing, you have no control over what the companies who like provide the service do,
Yeah.
or like what they do to their patients. I wouldn't even say patients, but like people who purchase their services, and also all because again, it's such a novel thing. The procedures involved, the medical companies involved, maybe what maybe to me loopholes, and it was if I was the government, I'd consider that as a potential danger, something that may be just like disturbing to this current system.
Okay.
So-
All right. Yeah, that's a very interesting answer. Okay. What it tells me is that the society you live in is very different from the society I grew up in. Okay. Because 25 years ago, when I was younger, we were taught that every life matters. Every life is a gift from God. And in society, we have to protect everyone, especially the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized, because that's how we come together as a society. If we just let anyone die, then how do you know that you'll be protected? Right? So what mattered back then was about social cohesion, social capital, social trust. And now what matters is just numbers. How much does this cost me? How much revenue will this generate? Okay, so that's the difference in the world today. Before, we cared about social cohesion. We cared about morality. Nowadays, it's all just money, money, money.